Thank you, Anna, and thank you everybody for being here. It's nice to see you online at least. So yeah, my name is Daniela. I work for the NABU in Germany. I work as a scientific associate in marine conservation and focusing on marine protected areas, but I'm also taking part in the HALCOM work. And today I want to present about the state of the Baltic Sea. So just to give a brief introduction, I know you know a lot about the Baltic Sea, but I wanted to remind that it's a really, really old environment. So 15,000 years ago, where the Baltic Sea is today, there was only a thick ice. And then with the time, with the warming and with the world ocean rushing in, the Baltic Sea came into its shape that it has today. And with its unique environment and the nature and the ecosystems that we know today. And there are 9 states surrounding the Baltic Sea, and these are also the states which are taking part in the HALCOM, which we also had now in the quiz. It was 10 contracting parties because it's plus the European Commission. And around the Baltic Sea, we also have 60 rivers entering into the sea, and this makes clear this is really a unique environment. It's a brackish water environment, and it's really old. So we have a lot of people living at the Baltic Sea, an estimated number of 85 million people, and a lot of people visiting the Baltic Sea. In 2017, for example, it was nearly the same amount of people which came to spend time at this unique region. Here are just some impressions of the Baltic Sea, and I'm sure you know a lot of them. We have many animals and habitats in the Baltic Sea, and we have a really beautiful nature and that our lives depend on. And we use it for recreation, for food, for living, for transport, and so on. And it's really diverse from the north and the south to the south. But yeah, we wanted to talk about the state of the Baltic Sea and how do we actually can assess the state of this environment. But I want to highlight today also on HALCOM results, because HALCOM is collecting a lot of data from different countries and has really nice reports which are published after some years again and again. For example, here you see how they work. So we have the data and we have some indicators, and they put them together in so-called thematic assessments. So these are reports about biodiversity, about eutrophication, to assess how the state is, and then they gain some so-called summary reports out of it, and these are then the so-called HOLAS reports. It's the holistic assessment, because they contain the results of different parts of the Baltic Sea. And we so far had 2 HOLAS reports for the Baltic Sea. The first one was published, I think, in 2008 for the years 2003 to 2007. The second assessment was published in 2018 from 11 to 16. It was covering the state of the environment. And the current state of the Baltic Sea report, the HOLAS 3, is now reviewed and will be published in summer or autumn. But some results I actually saw it are already online, and I tried to include as many results from the HOLAS 2 as possible in this presentation. And yeah, thinking about what is the state of the Baltic Sea, you want to hear, is it good, is it not good? And to give the result in the beginning already, the question is, it is not good. So the Baltic Sea is not in a good ecological state. And human activities are threatening a lot of species and their habitats, and therefore the whole nature and environment. Many fish, birds, and mammals and their habitats, they're exposed to heavy pollutions, and we have a lot of problems like eutrophication, So the oversupply of nutrients, fisheries, like over exploitation of fish, biodiversity loss, and we have marine litter, just for examples. And on top of all of this, there also comes climate change. So this is putting an additional pressure on this already poor ecosystem. But as we cannot focus on everything today, I wanted to only include 4 parts from the assessments. And this is the biodiversity part, which I think is of really high importance to know how does the biodiversity, is it healthy, and so on. Well, actually, we can already say we have a continuing decline of species and habitat. Then I wanted to take a short look on the hazardous substances which are entering the Baltic Sea, so harmful chemicals. The eutrophication is a really, really big problem. Some say it's the worst problem for the Baltic Sea because nearly the whole Baltic Sea or the whole Baltic Sea is affected by eutrophication, but you can say nearly like 100%, so 97% is it's affected. And last but not least, I also want to take a short look with you at the climate change. So, for example, the increase of surface water temperatures and so on. So as I said, the Baltic Sea is a brackish water environment, and as you can see on the left picture, it is really different from the north to the southern part. So we have a lot of salty water coming into the Baltic Sea from the North Sea, and but closer to the north, we don't have such high salinity level anymore. So we have the water, the fresh water coming from the rivers, and therefore you see that also the composition of species in the Baltic Sea is quite different. For example, you have more marine species in the more southern part and more freshwater species in the more northern part. And this already highlights how diverse but also how unique this environment is, and that the species which are living in the Baltic Sea, they have to get adjusted to a really different environment from the north to the south. So yeah, actually we come to the biodiversity assessment. I don't want to focus on the pressures now because Bettina and Ida will tell something about it later, but I want to focus with you on the state, how it is. So we see in the lower part for the biodiversity that, actually it shows that many species and habitats have a so-called inadequate status or just are in a bad status. So what HELCOM is doing, so the contracting parties, they are evaluating the indicators for example, different habitats, or for seals, for mammals, for birds, and then they give it a status, and they say for many species that they're in a bad status, so to say, and you only see that, for example, for the water birds and wintering season, this assessment was from the HOLES 2. They are in a good status, meaning like in a a lot of the area, they have a good status, but in some lower parts of the area, they are in a bad status. So, and many species and habitats are threatened, and they need more protection. And due to the short time that we only have today, I only want to give one example. It's about the fish. So actually we have 230 fish species recorded in the Baltic Sea, and the so-called integrated status of fish is generally not good. So 5 out of 8 currently assessed commercial fish stocks show the bad status. And the eel is even in a really critical status. So meaning that they are threatened, even becoming threatened to be extinct in the future. And for example, for the herring, we see here in this graph that the stock size was declining. And it's not only the HALCOM data which is showing this, also the IUCN is publishing results, and they are nearly the same. And for example, there are some scientific publications which are discussing about why is it wrong, the status, what is the problem, and there is one called even climate change or mismanagement, and they are trying to find out, like, is it the climate change which is the main cause of the declining of the species, or is it the mismanagement? And there's a lot of evidence that there was a lot of like a high mismanagement in the past, because we have data from decades ago, and therefore we could have seen coming that species will decline. Well, all species are dependent on each other, and they are connected in an ecosystem. And so I want to tell a bit about food webs. They're really dynamic and interconnected, you can say. So, for example, for the fish, fish species are for some humans a food source, but the fish is also prey for marine mammals and for seabirds. And fish themselves, they feed on benthic species, they feed on zooplankton and on smaller fish. And therefore, there's a link between these different parts of the food web. I talked a lot about fish, but for the marine mammals in the Baltic Sea, we have 4 species which are resident, 3 seal species, the gray seal, the harbor seal, and the ringed seal, and we have the harbor porpoises with even subpopulations. And these predators, they have an important role in regulating the food web, but they are also really sensitive to pressures in all their areas of distribution, and therefore for the changes in the whole food web. And therefore, this tells like the status of the marine mammals tells a lot about the health of the ecosystem. And as the overall status of marine mammals species is not in a good state, we therefore also see that we have an unhealthy food web system. So coming to the second focus, it's about the hazardous substances, but also really briefly only. So you can say that the pressure on the marine environment from contaminants is high in all parts of the Baltic Sea. You can see it in the right figure. And the ecosystem remains impacted by hazardous substances. So, for example, mercury polybrominated diphenyl ethers, I cannot respell it, I'm sorry, and the radioactive isotope cesium-137, you might know it from the Chernobyl disaster. They show particularly high contamination scores in the Baltic Sea environment, and many of the contaminants in the marine environment, they degrade really slowly, and so therefore their impacts can magnify as they accumulate within the aquatic food web. One example also showing then how hazardous substances impact biodiversity, or like how they impact animals, is the indicator white-tailed sea eagle productivity. So how is the status of their productivity? And actually there were some impacts since the 1950s, when it was identified at the time that so-called DDTs, they were harming the wild-tail sea eagle, and the sea eagle therefore had suffered for decades from the effects of this persistent chemicals in the Baltic Sea environments. But then there was a ban on the use of these substances, and now we see that there was a positive development since the 1980s. You might wonder why you see on this picture like different results. It's on the left you see the HOLAS 2 and results, and on the right the HOLAS 3. And you see that in some parts where the productivity was in a good status in 2011 to 16, it was in a bad status years later. But this is due to the reason that for the productivity there are like a lot of data which is included, but we see that in some parts also yeah, the contamination from DDTs was now reduced and lowered, and therefore the productivity is improving. But this also shows, I think, these results that there is also yeah, some uncertainty sometimes over the years. So coming to eutrophication, the eutrophication is yeah, because of an, you can say, overabundance of nutrients, so primarily nitrogen and phosphorus in the water. And yeah, this comes from agriculture, it comes from the rivers who are flowing into the Baltic Sea, and all of this, like with the heating of the Baltic Sea with the water, it will just yeah, become worse in the future. And the inputs of nitrogen and phosphorus in the Baltic Sea subbasins, they have decreased in recent years, but you can see that still the status is high because of the past, and because what I told you, that 97% is eutrophicated of the Baltic Sea. It will take a long while to get rid of the nutrients, and also with the mass animal livestock we have, and the whole industry and agriculture still going on in many parts of the Baltic Sea, the situation might improve a bit, but not that significant that we can say like it's really getting better. And the last topic I wanted to kind of touch is the climate change. I just wanted to show you two graphs. One that is showing that the extent of the sea ice is declining. And I think this is like a big problem also for biodiversity, because we have to face the problem that species which are living in the northern part and are dependent on the ice, they might migrate to the more southern part of the Baltic Sea. But this might not be the right environment for them. And also, like, this is like shifting the whole, environment, so to say. So on the right, you see then the mean sea level rise in the Baltic Sea, and this was calculated between 1995 and 2019. And also here we see that sea level is rising. And here comes another problem. We have a lot of people living at the Baltic Sea. And yeah, as I told you, a lot of tourists are coming to the Baltic Sea because it's really attractive with its landscape. So we are facing a lot of problems here. And therefore, an integrated assessment and management, and also adoption of management will be really important in the future. So I talked a lot about the state of the Baltic Sea, but I just wanted to show you a really nice image, I think, on the left, which is showing like what is going on. Like, we have a lot of interests in the Baltic Sea, a lot of pressures, and everybody wants to kind of own parts of the Baltic Sea, wants to use the Baltic Sea. So we have tourism, we have the traveling, we use the Baltic Sea as food source and for energy structure and for transportation. But we then can ask, like, where is the nature in all of this? Because we saw like the Baltic Sea is in a bad ecological state, but how can it improve when there is kind of no space for nature? So actually I wanted to show you the right image with this to show that we have quite a lot of marine protected areas. We need a lot of more, but you see that there were in 2007 not as many as today. So we had 104 marine protected areas in 2007. 3 years later, we had 159. And in 2018, there were 176. But I have to say, this is HALCOM MPAs, so MPAs which are kind of, how you say, under the HALCOM, which are registered at HALCOM. And so there is a coverage of around 12 to maybe today 13 or 14% of MPAs, but actually they are not really used in the way they should, because marine protected areas should really protect the marine environment, but we see that there is a lot of also new developing infrastructure. There's fishing still taking place in marine protected areas, and a lot of use of the areas where the species should actually have space to recover. And with this, I want to just take a look in the future. Like you hear a lot about the HALCOM and I think also the Baltic Sea Action Plan last week. And the question here is like, why do we have a second plan? I think, well, we have a new plan, but the problem is we needed a new plan. And I think like with now 200, around 200, or it's 199 actions which are covered by the Baltic Sea Action Plan, this also shows us that we needed to do a lot more in the past. And I also showed you some marine protected areas we have, but they are not really protecting. So I think it is of high importance that for now with the Baltic Sea Action Plan, which should be successful in 2030 and which should, with this vision, create a good ecological status of the Baltic Sea environment, we really need to be successful. And what I observe is that we need to come from a perspective where we talk a lot about the state of the Baltic Sea, which we know is just bad, into more action. And therefore I have a lot of hope now that we get it done with this new Baltic Sea Action Plan. It's a really short time period. 2030 is, in terms of marine conservation, it's really soon. But I'm I have a lot of hope, because maybe that's the only hope that we will get it done and that we can kind of protect more the Baltic Sea environment. And this is it for now. If you have any questions, I'm not sure if we have the time now, because I see we have a group work. But please don't hesitate to contact me anytime also later on. And I'm just happy to hear about also your opinions about the state of the Baltic Sea. Thanks.